Hello, my name's Sean Hewitt in Nottingham. This is my colleague Sid Smith, he's in Whitley Bay. And if you want to tell us apart, I'm the one who won't make you nervous and won't talk too much. And he's the one who walks like Bo Diddley and sadly does need a crutch. Not my words, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just paraphrasing the words of Bob Dylan. And that's who we're discussing. This week we'll be discussing Highway 61 Revisited in our epic bluster through the definitive Bob Dylan vinyl catalogue. A part work we're following with great love and interest. I subscribe to this. I know you get it in the shops, don't you?
Yeah.
And this time I received a letter with my subscription. And
was it a letter from Bob?
No, it's just signed mysteriously, the publisher. The publisher.
Well, that's a well-known alias for Bob Dylan.
It could be one of his aliases, the publisher. But it just thank you for subscribing. Due to delays with production and shipping, we have changed the order of your subscription gifts, and your 2 Bob Dylan books are included with this dispatch instead of your magazine holder. You will still receive your magazine holder, but this will now be the last subscription gift rather than the second. We hope you to continue to enjoy your collection. This does not affect your statutory rights. Now, to be perfectly honest, I've not been thrilled to see what the magazine holder is like. I mean, what's it going to be like? 2 bits of cardboard. I mean, and also they do kind of provide a series of 41 magazine holders, free with the magazine. So I'm a bit.
I can demonstrate that for you right now.
Show me now.
Yeah, no. This is how you do it.
I've not got the hang of this yet. That's brilliant. Yeah, that really works, Sid. Well done. But anyway, they have sent me 2 books. This is the Mammoth Book of Bob Dylan. And it is quite mammoth. It's nearly 500 pages. And it's basically a series of articles edited by Sean Egan, covering the entire breadth of the career from the very start right up until the release of the mono box set a few years ago, with Christmas in the Heart. So it is very late in the career. So that is actually quite good. And there's Sean Egan himself, there's Mark Ellen, Michael Gray, Nat Hentoff, Andy Gill, Johnny Black. You know, there's quite a few. Phil Sutcliffe, well-known music journalists, Michael Gray and Gavin Martin, Stephen Dalton. They've all got several pieces in this. I've dipped into it. I've not read it. It's pretty well written, actually. I think this is a very worthwhile book, and I'm surprised when I saw the picture of this. I thought, well, that's going to be rubbish, but it's actually quite a handsome volume, and if you want to get it, it's only about £3 on Amazon as well. So there's a tip. The other book is by an obscure author who is described on the cover as the greatest living poet by literary scholar Van Morrison. And this is Tarantula, Dylan's 1966 book, which I've read this week as part of my job as Bob Dylan commentator. And yes, I shan't be reading this again in a hurry. But it's got a few laughs in it. I think he was originally contracted to write a novel. This isn't a novel. I'm not sure what this is. When it came out, interestingly, and this is very interesting actually, the future Nobel Prize for Literature winner said it's a John Lennon type book. So there you go. Now, if you want to see real bit of writing by Bob Dylan, I suggest you read Chronicles Volume 1, because that's really good. But
I used to see copies of Tarantula in when it was on the Panther imprint.
Yes,
with a great photograph of him on the front cover. You used to see secondhand copies of that in the 70s, particularly, littering every kind of shop imaginable. I think Woolworths had it in stock at one point, going for a bargain. And oddly enough, I do actually have a sort of vague like for Tarantula. It is rubbish. Of course, it's rubbish. But
that's what you say about everything he does.
But I feel
it has no impact.
I just quite like the free fall of it all, and I mean that sort of also applies to the sleeve notes.
I was going to say, this reminds me of nothing more elevated than an extended sleeve note.
Yeah,
there are some good jokes in it, and there's a lot of clever wordplay in it. He's got a turn of phrase, but I think he's making, at the time he writes this, 3 of the greatest albums in rock history, and he's touring his arse off. I don't think he's got time to sit and write what is supposed to be a book at the time at all. And he doesn't write a book. That's not a book. That's just a series of ramblings, really. When he writes Chronicles, that is a serious book.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting one. And it's very well written as well. But this, I read it when I was a kid, a teenager. I got it from the library. And I remember really struggling with it. And I'm now in my late 20s, as you know, Sid, and I've read it again. And I still struggle with it quite a bit. It didn't take me as long as I thought it was going to do to read. I realised when I opened the pages, I'd got nightmare visions of being stuck on this book forever, like I was when I was a kid. But, you know, I wasn't very impressed with it. I was impressed with it in flashes, but not as a totality.
No.
Anyway, enough of that. Let's get on to this.
Yeah.
What did you think of this?
Well, unlike previous episodes where you know, I've listened to the album for the very first time, I actually I know this album. I bought a copy of it, you know, sometime in the last 30 odd years, probably maybe 40 years. So I'm actually familiar with pretty much all of it, and that's a first in this series for me, because the other 3 or 4 that we've done, I'd not heard. While I was familiar with some of the material, I was not familiar with the album overall. I mean, the short version, you know, is that I think. I mean, Highway 61. I know it's unfortunate that we're listening to them out of sequence, because I think you miss the, you know, the kind of the logical
evolution,
leap forward and extensions that exist. But man, it's a great album. I do like this album. I think it sounds terrific. Oh, and that's something that we should actually say. For all the magazine that comes with this this series is rubbish. The pressings, the sound quality on these things so far, to my ears, sounds really good. I was really sort of knocked out by them. So now I'm not a vinyl head, and I'm not a kind of an audiophile, so I don't know, you know, what the origin of these things are, but it just sounds great. For me, there's a kind of excitement that exists on this album. It's got the side 1 in particular, I think, is incredibly strong. I mean, it really barrels along, and you do. I said this on an earlier episode about a track where I can't remember now. It might have been on the first album, where I described Dylan as kind of coming out the gate, you know, like running towards the microphone. His guitar. And I think there's definitely a bit of that on this album, where he's in a room this time with a bunch of musicians, and you can kind of get a sense quite easily on the album. It comes over. You can get a sense of the energy and excitement that's going on in the room. I listened to, I mean, you know, a track like a Rolling Stone. It's kind of, it's sort of it's thrilling, it's impassioned, and it's kind of, for me, I mean, this might be technically wrong, I don't know, but for me, it's kind of sounds like the arrival of modern rock vocals. It sounds like kind of, I mean, I know, you know, you had Jagger and stuff, you know, doing their thing, but for me, there's something about the delivery of the vocals on this album, and that track, like a Rolling Stone in particular, I mean, it does sound like grown-up rock and roll. It does sound like grown-up R&B. It's got this weird mix of rock and roll and R&B sort of all together. And it does sound very, for something that was probably largely improvised in terms of its arrangements, it does sound very assured and very confident of itself. And that sort of, in a way, inspires confidence in the listener. The listener just gets wrapped up in that and goes, yeah. I'm along for the ride with it. I think overall it's a triumph.
My goodness, I've never heard you speak like. Well, when you've seen your doctor, and we have the next episode, we'll discuss what you've just said. But I think this is a classic album. I think this is one of his strongest ever albums, and it, as you say, it is a pity we've not heard the previous album in the sequence first, because that's like half electric, half acoustic.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's like he's taking a step in this direction. But this is diving in the deep end. We get musicians on every track with him on this, and I think it's a difference in the sound. This is the album that really upset. They were already pissed off by bringing it all back home, but the folk lot are really upset by this album because he's got an electric guitar, he's gone commercial, and he's going to do what they see as the greatest crime of all, making a long-playing record that people might actually want to buy and spend money on. And that means he's a capitalist, and therefore he's lost all authority. And that's literally the argument, as if this is a more commercial record than the freewheeling Bob Dylan, as if this is a safer record, you know. And I find that an extraordinary contention disproved by just listening to the bloody thing. Just listen to the bloody thing. So that's an important thing. The other important thing is the lyrics, which he's heard the Beatles. That's the basic background to this. He's a lad who started out wanting to be Little Richard at school and was told off for banging on the school piano on the stage during a show by the headmaster. Get off that piano, Zimmerman, you know. And he's always wanted to play piano in a rock and roll band for his entire life. And then he's become interested in folk music and he's taken over that world. And then he's heard the Beatles literally on a car radio when they're driving between gigs. And he's been entranced by them. And he thinks, what if I did what I'm doing and I added it to what they're doing? They're a real influence on this album. Yeah. And he just thinks, he's quoted as saying, when I heard them, I knew this is it. They've drawn a line. They've drawn a definite line, and I want to be on their side of that line, you know. So that, of course, enrages the Pete Seegers and the Peter, Paul and Marys, who think rock music is fundamentally moronic. But it excites the impulse he had when he heard Little Richard as a kid. And what if I do that with this? And the words change as well. You often said when we were listening to the earlier albums, you were surprised at the amount of humor because you thought it was going to be very earnest and protesty. And sometimes he is earnest and protesty on those records, on all his records, because he's dealing with, as a young man, he feels there are serious social injustices. He's not earnest on this album. He's describing, he's changed his stance. He sees the world as fundamentally brutal and absurd, and he's mocking it. That's what he's doing. Yeah. He's describing, in America at the time, you've got the Vietnam War just beginning. You've got still people being lynched and murdered in the Deep South. You've got the young people just starting to protest against Vietnam and things like that, and being met with incredible brutality by the police and the authorities, which will lead to them students being killed in protest. And he now sees the earlier formal, earnest protest songs as inadequate to deal with that world. So he is going more abstract, and he's mocking it. It's a kind of cooler than thou piss take type humor on some of these lines. Yeah. Which are also beautifully constructed. I mean, I think the lyric, we've mentioned that from the first drum beat and then that rollicking mass of sound of Like a Rolling Stone. The sound of Like a Rolling Stone is incredibly important. Joni Mitchell heard it and said, oh, now there's somebody grown up making records, you know. Frank Zappa said, when society didn't collapse when that record came out, he knew that rock music couldn't change anything. Because he heard it and was tremendously impressed by it, you know.
As you know, I remain a bit of a skeptic when it comes to Bob Dylan being about basically being
lyrics,
the lyrical messiah. I do struggle with that aspect of it. So I tend not to listen to the lyrics. I tend to just get the overall shape of the sound. And you know, I do struggle. Like there's a line in Like a Rolling Stone, which by the way I love. I mean, I love Like a Rolling Stone. I think it's great. It never fails to thrill me when I listen to it. And I listened to, before I get to the point I was going to make, I listened to very recently the Cutting Edge box set.
Oh God, yeah.
Which one of the CD3 on there has what I believe is more or less every bit of every take of Like a Rolling Stone, and it's fascinating listening to that come together in its different forms. And it's also fascinating just on how arbitrary a lot of it is, and on the fly, and it's kind of like, yeah, that'll do. So I'd love all that, but the lyrics. But what's interesting is he then goes away and thinks about what he's going to sing over the top of it and works on it a bit, and you know, that's fine, but I can't. I struggle to take a lot of it seriously. Like there's a line. It's something about a chrome horse and a diplomat with a Siamese cat, and that's really just somebody struggling for a rhyme. But I love the way that's kind of invested as, oh, it has a meaning and the layers. And I think actually a lot of the time Dylan actually says, you know, in interviews, you know, like, stop asking what it means. And I think that's often because he doesn't know what it means. It's for a lot of the time he doesn't have a clue what it means. It just scans, or it fits well. So the chrome, I mean, somebody somewhere will have probably done an academic paper on what the chrome horse signifies, the importance of the Siamese cat, the semiology of the Siamese cat in culture in the last sort of several centuries, and of course there is the mysterious identity of the diplomat to kind of parse and discern. So that kind, but all of that's got nothing to do with Bob Dylan. It's
well, it has, because he set that train rolling. I do agree with you. In these songs, he sometimes is doing that, and there are some unfortunate rhymes even later on when he becomes more considered in the lyrics. But I don't think he's just stringing words together randomly. I think you've just mentioned a case there, yeah. But the other case that people make about Like a Rolling Stone's lyrics is that it's just one long sneer, and that he's John Landau, then Rolling Stone journalist who became Bruce Springsteen's manager, says he's just sneering at his girl, and that's not what that song is. He sounds like he's sneering at first, but he's also saying that this person he's singing to has lost all these things, these outside accoutrements of society and success, and is now on the street level that they've ignored for the rest of their life. And there's a sense in the song in which that's quite a liberation for them. And so I think this song is a lot more positive than people make out. And he has a trick of doing that. People, there's a song that ends a much later album, which we'll come to way down the line, but everyone thinks that's a doom-laden line, but it is masking a great deal of hope. And I think this is a cooler than thou, put downy song, which ultimately has a positive message, and which he means to convey, and whether he says this doesn't mean anything, or I just make it to make sense. I don't trust a word Bob Dylan says. I don't trust a word he says. I wouldn't trust it if he said it did make sense.
But
you know what I mean? I think it's a big mistake to believing a word he says.
But you can see that we're into the Life of Brian territory. You know,
yeah, we are definitely.
It
we are, because
the
thing about all that matters is whether there is a bloody chrome horse and a diplomat with a Siamese bloody cat. This record was made in 1965.
Yeah.
That
was a great year. That was 1965 was a great year.
Yeah. I mean, incredibly, as a single, like a roll. This is an example of how exciting music was then compared to the corporate wallpaper it is now. Like a Rolling Stone, as a single, got to #2 in the US singles chart, and it was only kept off by the Beatles' Help.
Yeah,
and I don't know what the rest of that chart's like. So but already those the #1 and the #2 records sound a lot more interesting to me than whatever's #1 now. I don't think to you. I mean, it's just like.
I here's the thing. There's two things. One is I must earlier on you used the phrase earnest protesty, Tom, and I think earnest protesty is a great name for a folk singer.
The Bob Dylan Tribute Act.
Yeah, absolutely. Earnest protesty here. I'd like to play from Bob Dylan.
You can play him in the next broadcast.
I will. The other thing, with what you, I mean, I'm not seriously disputing what you say. I understand that it's great listening to all that stuff just burble out.
Yes,
I don't spend a lot of time listening to the intricacies of it. I just hear the tone and the kind of
that's the best way to approach it.
Yeah, I always think. I mean, we're only talking largely about like a Rolling Stone, but with good cause. Even as much as I like it, I think round about 4 minutes after just before the verse where he starts singing about princes and people verse, if you just faded it out there, you'd have a pretty perfect 4 minutes.
You're going to love Nashville Skyline.
Yeah. So what's the favorite track? What's your favorite track from this album?
That's a very good question, because with the exception of one track, which is from a Buick 6, which I don't think is quite the standard of the rest of the record, I like every single one of the songs on this record. I think it's crammed with great songs. And one point I will quite quickly is, like a Rolling Stone, the first track on this record is the only track produced by his previous producer, Tom Wilson. And the last track Tom Wilson produces. And the rest of the album is produced by Bob Johnston, who will now be producing quite a number of albums for Bob. I think Tom Wilson is a remarkably better producer. And I think Bob Johnston leads him down some terrible alleyways in the future. So I do think that's just say farewell to Tom. I think he's a great producer, and he fell out with Bob, or Bob fell out with him or something. And Bob Johnston, who was a far more easygoing character, shall we say, took his place. And I think that's a bit of a shame. But my favourite song on this album is probably Highway 61 Revisited itself. I mean, I do like Desolation Row. I know you're going to, that's 11 odd minutes, isn't it? Desolation Row is an extremely good lyric. And I do like Queen Jane Approximately, which I think is to Joan Baez. That's
Queen Jane Approximately is a great song. It's a really, I love it to bits. There's a great version. I mean, it's one of those songs that's covered by everybody. I think Judy Collins, I've heard that version. Nancy Sinatra, I think.
Did she? I didn't know that.
Oh no, I'm getting mixed up. She.
It's not the boots. These boots are made for walking, Sid. It's a different song.
That's where I always make that mistake. So yeah. what the other thing about Queen Jane Approximately, when you listen to it, it's approximately in tune. but only approximately. I love that. I love the fact that when it all comes in, you go, oh, and your ear starts kind of buzzing a little bit. You kind of go, oh,
Yeah.
somebody's tuned up there. But it's a great. It's a
lovely song, and it's a caring song. It sounds to me as well. I think it's about Joan Baez.
Yeah. I've actually got a great cover version. I found a great cover version of it by Kokomo, which kind of, if I can find it, goes
what,
like
the Funksters. Dead. Please stop.
That's not to be confused with Kokomo with Mel Collins and people like that in it. That's, although online on the streaming services they do mix it up with that band. It's in fact an Australasian band who do Bob Dylan cover versions. But anyway, going back,
it's led by a guy called Ernest Protesty, apparently.
Yeah. Highway 61. That's a good choice. Good choice.
Yeah.
Great song.
I'll just say one more thing about Highway 61 before I get your favourite track, and that is on Shadow Kingdom, which was subtitled The Early Songs of Bob Dylan, even though one of the songs is from 1989, 24 years after this early album by Bob Dylan. He does 3 songs from this album, which is quite extraordinary. And he does Tombstone Blues, almost like a poetic recitation with very minimal backing. He does Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, and he does a brilliant, really moving version of Queen Jane approximately as well. But the reason I like that song less than Highway 61 Revisited is what you were saying early on about the spontaneity and the random nature. The way Highway 61 starts with that ludicrous police klaxon siren thing. Al Cooper just took that to the session, and he just said, "Listen to this, Bob." Everyone, I've listened to the complete sessions of this album before doing this, and everyone just cracks up. Everyone just cracks up, and then Bob takes it, and he's trying to sort of as they start playing it, and there's a couple of really horrendous. Everyone just falling about, and he's going, no, I'll get it this time. But that is such an outrageous sound. The bloke who did The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, you can tell how they're going at Newport. What's he doing now? And then they got that amazing first line. God said to Abraham, "Kill me a son."
Yeah. And
I just think it just goes. It's like that. I mean, it's a great song. And Highway 61 is, of course, when you're a kid in about your vintage, it was difficult for us as young people to imagine how big America is. We have the M1 and the A6. They have these amazing freeways that go hundreds of bloody miles, through the length of countries, And Highway 61 leads from where he was born. It links that with Mississippi, where the blues were born. So that's why the album is called Highway 61 Revisited. There's a lot of blues, recycled blues ideas on this record, but I love the fact that he's taken that blues concept. He's put a bloody police siren on it. He starts off with this outrageous line, God said to Abraham, "Kill me a son." Abraham says, "What? You must be putting me on." And it, again, it's this absurd world where it ends with trying to find a promoter to promote the Third World War. He goes, "Oh, just put some bleachers out in the sun. Stick it out on Highway 61." And there's a whole lot of things happening in what is basically a series of jokes, as often on this record. And I just think there's something very exciting about that record. I would pick Like a Rolling Stone. It's one of the most important songs ever, but I think Highway 61 is great, a little less familiar and brilliant. What's your favourite?
My favourite, like you, I have a bit of, I have a lot of love for Like a Rolling Stone and Queen Jane, and Tombstone Blues. Great, I love Tombstone Blues. But the track that I really love is Ballad of a Thin Man. It's
Oh yeah,
and I love the contrast between Dylan's. It's another like a Rolling Stone. It's a bit of a sneery kind of song.
yeah, very sneery. I think
Dylan kind of handing down the judgment on kind of people kind of wanting to rubberneck the cultural, the counterculture, and all of that sort of stuff going on. But for me, why that song works, and I'm not sure there's much else like it, certainly from that I'm familiar with. I love the combination of Dylan's drony, earthy voice and what I presume is Al Cooper's kind of vaporous, kind of vapor trail organ that sort of sweeps around the song and the lyric, like kind of like, as I say, some kind of vapor trail. It's a gorgeous, lighter than air sound, and it's a perfect contrast to this kind of dogged descending piano line, and Dylan's kind of very earthy, as I say, drony delivery. I listened to the Cutting Edge box set recently, and there's a really great version of Ballad of a Thin Man on that, where I think there's a lot more organ, and it is considerably shorter, which always, because it breaks down, because somebody plays like a wrong chord.
yeah, they stopped playing it. They just stopped the thing and made a mistake. Yeah,
and I'm thinking, no, keep that, and just fade it out. That's job done. So for me, it's Ballad of Thin Man. Great song, great performance, great sound, and that wonderful dark and light kind of shade thing going on. What's next, Sean?
What we're doing next? Next time, we're doing the album before this.
Yeah, we're going back in time.
Again. When will we go forward in time consistently? I don't know. But we're going back in time to the album released, I think, a few months, 5 months, I think, before this album.
Okay.
Bringing it all back home.
Great stuff.
See you next time.
Cheers.